The champagne flute slipped through her fingers, and she caught it just before it shattered against the marble floor. Her heart hammered as she straightened, the weight of the silver tray digging into her already aching forearm. Around her, Chicago's elite glittered like the crystal chandeliers overhead, their laughter echoing through the lakefront ballroom of the Drake Hotel. She had been on her feet for 6 hours straight, weaving through designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, invisible to everyone except when they needed their glasses refilled. The event coordinator had warned them this morning. Tonight's charity gala hosted some of the city's most powerful people. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. And for God's sake, don't spill anything. Her lower back throbbed with each step, a reminder that her waitressing shoes were 2 years old and held together more by hope than by their original stitching. She had worked 3 jobs to save enough to move to Chicago 6 months ago, leaving behind a small town in Indiana where opportunities were as rare as cool summer days. This catering gig paid double her usual rate, money she desperately needed for next month's rent. The ballroom was a study in excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame Lake Michigan, where moonlight danced across dark waves. Ice sculptures of swans melted slowly on tables draped in cream silk. A string quartet played something classical and forgettable while guests discussed art acquisitions and European vacations with the casual ease of people who had never worried about making rent. She adjusted her grip on the tray, her fingers cramping. The uniform they had given her was a size too small, the black fabric pulling tight across her shoulders. She had pinned her dark hair into a severe bun, hoping to look professional despite the exhaustion that shadowed her eyes. 24 years old, and she already felt ancient. Brenda Davis, the head server, hissed from across the room, gesturing frantically toward a group of men gathered near the terrace doors. Table 7 mead service. Move. She wove through the crowd, her tray balanced perfectly despite the obstacle course of elbows and evening bads. The skill came from 6 months of practice, countless near disasters teaching her to anticipate movement, to flow like water around the solid masses of wealth and privilege. As she approached table 7, she caught fragments of conversation, business deals conducted in low voices, names she didn't recognize, but that clearly held weight. The men stood in a loose circle, their body language screaming power and control. She had learned to read these signals, to understand the invisible hierarchies that governed rooms like this. One man stood slightly apart from the others, his posture radiating authority even in stillness. He was younger than she expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. His tuxedo fit him perfectly, not a single wrinkle disrupting the clean lines. A platinum watch caught the light as he gestured while speaking, the kind of timepiece that cost more than most people's cars. She focused on her task, approaching with her practiced, invisible efficiency. Champagne, gentlemen. Most of them didn't even glance her way, simply reaching for glasses without acknowledgement. She was furniture, a function rather than a person. But the man in the perfect tuxedo looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. His were dark, almost black in the ballroom's golden light, and something flickered in them. Recognition. Curiosity. Before she could analyze it further, something caught her attention. A red dot, impossibly small, dancing across the shoulder of his jacket. Her breath froze in her lungs as she tracked it upward, watching it settle with deadly precision on his forehead. Time seemed to slow. The dot was perfectly steady. Professional. She had seen enough action movies to know what it meant. Someone somewhere in this room or beyond these windows had a laser sight trained on this man. Had a weapon pointed at his head. Her mind raced. If she screamed, caused a panic, would the shooter fire immediately? Would innocent people get hurt in the chaos? But if she did nothing, this man would die right in front of her, his blood spattering across the champagne she was serving. The decision crystallized in an instant. She sat down her tray with hands that barely shook, stepped closer to him, and did the only thing she could think of. She smiled bright and flirtatious and placed her hand on his arm. "Excuse me," she said, her voice pitched low and intimate for his ears only. "There is a red dot on your forehead. Don't react. Don't move. Just follow my lead." His entire body went rigid beneath her touch, the muscles of his arm turning to absolute steel. But to his credit, his expression did not shatter. Those dark, calculating eyes locked onto hers with a sudden, terrifying focus that made her forget how to breathe. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble with a trace of a cold Chicago edge. "Right now, I am the woman keeping you alive," she whispered, stepping into his personal space as the dot tracked back to his temple. "Dance with me. Now." His jaw tightened, suspicion clear in every line of his face. "Why should I trust you?" "Because in about 10 seconds, someone is going to put a bullet through your skull if you do not move." Her hand slid from his arm to his hand, her fingers threading through his. "Please." For a heartbeat, he did not react. Then, with fluid grace that suggested he was used to making split-second decisions, he pulled her toward the dance floor. The string quartet had shifted to a waltz, and he swept her into the rhythm without missing a beat. His hand settled at the small of her back, warm through the thin fabric of her uniform. They moved together, and she felt the red dot tracking them, trying to find its target again. She guided them deeper into the crowd of dancers, using their bodies as cover. "Talk," he commanded softly, his breath warm against her ear. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me," Clara hissed back, hyper-aware of how close they were, how his cologne smelled like expensive wood and something darker. "I am just a waitress who happened to notice the laser sight aimed at your head." His grip on her tightened fractionally. "You expect me to believe that?" "I do not care what you believe. I just did not want to watch someone die tonight." She risked a glance over his shoulder, scanning the ballroom for any sign of the shooter. "Do you have enemies who would want you dead?" His laugh was cold, humorless. "In my line of work, that is a long list." He guided them toward the far side of the dance floor, his movements calculated, protective. The music swelled and he pulled her closer, eliminating any space between them. Her heart raced, but not entirely from fear anymore. "My name is Clara, by the way. Clara Hayes." "Julian," he replied, and something in his tone suggested he did not give his name often or easily. "Julian Thorne." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it, the weight it carried, told her it should have. Around them, other dancers glided past, oblivious to the danger. The red dot had disappeared, but she did not know if that meant the threat was gone or if the shooter had simply found a better position. "Your friends at table 7 are looking worried," she observed. 3 men in expensive suits had abandoned their drinks and were scanning the room with the kind of alertness that suggested they were not just business associates. "They are not friends," Julian said. "They are family." The way he emphasized the word made it clear he was not talking about blood relations. She had lived in Chicago long enough to know what family meant in certain contexts. Her stomach dropped. "Oh, God," she breathed. She had just grabbed a Mafia boss and pulled him onto a dance floor. She had touched him without permission, issued him commands, invaded his personal space. In action movies, people who did that sort of thing usually ended up dead. "I was just trying to help," she managed. His dark eyes studied her face, searching for deception. "Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Because I am apparently an idiot who acts before thinking." Another cold smile. "At least you are honest about that." The waltz ended and couples around them broke apart, applauding politely for the quartet. Julian did not release her. Instead, he kept his hand at her back, guiding her off the dance floor toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Clara," he said, testing her name. "Tell me, how exactly did you spot that laser sight when no one else did?" She glanced around, suddenly aware that several of his family members had formed a loose perimeter around them. They looked like models in a luxury watch ad, but their eyes held a hardness that suggested they were much more than decorative. I was serving your table, she explained. I had a clear view. The dot was just there on your forehead. I did not think, I just acted. You did not think, he repeated slowly. You saw what you believed was a threat to a complete stranger's life, and your immediate instinct was to put yourself in danger to help them. Well, when you phrase it like that, it sounds stupid. It was stupid. His thumb brushed across her lower back, a gesture that might have looked casual, but sent electricity through her nervous system. Or incredibly brave. I have not decided which yet. One of Julian's men approached, a tall figure with silver threading through his dark hair, leaning in to whisper something in rapid Italian. Julian's expression hardened into a mask of pure ice. It seems, he said to Clara, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave, that you are correct about the threat. My people found evidence of a sniper position on the building across the street. The shooter is gone now, but he was definitely there. Relief and terror warred in Clara's chest, making her breath hitch. So I did not imagine it. No, you did not, his gaze intensified, pinning her in place. Which means you saved my life, Clara Hayes. And that puts us both in a very complicated situation. What do you mean? She asked, her hands gripping the edges of her empty serving tray. I mean, Julian said softly, stepping into her space so completely the rest of the ballroom faded, that you are now a witness. You can identify the location, the timing. If my enemies discover that you interfered with their attempt on my life, you become a target. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her worn, 2-year-old waitressing shoes. But I do not know anything. I do not even know who you really are. You know enough. He gestured to the silver-haired man. Dante, make sure the exits are secure. No one leaves until I say so. Then he turned back to Clara, his dark eyes leaving no room for argument. I am afraid you will not be returning to your serving duties tonight, Clara. For your own protection, you need to stay close to me. I cannot just leave my job, she protested, panic rising hot in her throat as she thought of her past due bills and the eviction notice sitting on her kitchen counter. I need this money. I will compensate you for your time. He pulled out a phone, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. Generously. Consider it a thank you for the warning. I do not want your money, she lied, even as her practical side screamed that she absolutely did need his money. I just want to go home and forget this ever happened. Julian's expression suggested that was not going to be an option. He placed a heavy, warm hand beneath her elbow, guiding her away from the glittering lights and oblivious wealthy guests. Your life just changed, Clara. The question is whether you will accept my protection or try to run and hope my enemies do not find you first. It was not much of a choice, and they both knew it. She followed Julian through a private service corridor, her mind reeling from everything that had happened in the last 20 minutes. 2 of his men flanked them, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings with professional paranoia. The crisp autumn air hit her face as they exited through the back of the Drake Hotel, the chill of Lake Michigan biting through her thin uniform. A black SUV waited in the alley, its engine already running with a low, menacing purr. Get in, Julian instructed, opening the heavy rear door. Clara hesitated, every instinct screaming that getting into a car with a man connected to the Chicago underworld was a terrible idea, but the alternative of walking to the train alone seemed even worse. She climbed into the leather-scented interior, sinking into seats that cost more than her apartment. Julian slid in beside her, his presence filling the enclosed space with overwhelming heat and the sharp scent of cedar. The driver pulled away from the curb with practiced smoothness, merging into the late-night traffic of the Gold Coast. Clara watched the familiar city streets slide past, the neon signs reflecting off rain-slicked pavement, taking her further and further away from the life she knew. I need to call my roommate, Clara said, hating how small and fragile her voice sounded. She will worry if I do not come home. Julian handed her his phone without looking up from his own device. Use this. Do not mention where you are or who you are with. Just say you picked up an extra shift. The casual, demanding way he issued commands made her teeth clench, but she took the phone and dialed the familiar number. When her roommate answered, fuzzy with sleep, Clara swallowed her terror and delivered the lie flawlessly, saying the catering company needed her for an overnight cleanup. After hanging up, she caught Julian watching her with an unreadable, intense expression. "Natural delivery," he murmured. "Have you lied to her before?" "Only about how okay I actually am," Clara admitted, instantly regretting the raw confession. Something about the darkness of the SUV made her foolishly honest. Julian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as the vehicle descended into a private, underground parking garage beneath a towering glass skyscraper. They took a private elevator that required a retinal scan, shooting up dozens of floors in stomach-churning silence. The doors opened directly into a sprawling penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, the city glittering like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The space was pristine, decorated in cold shades of gray and black, looking more like a fortress than a home. "You will stay in one of my guest suites tonight," Julian announced, shrugging off his tuxedo jacket to reveal the corded muscles of his shoulders beneath his crisp white shirt. "Tomorrow, we will assess the situation and determine next steps." Dante stepped out from the shadows of the hallway holding a tablet. "Boss, we have the security footage. You are going to want to see this." Julian moved to a large screen mounted on the wall, and Clara tentatively followed. The screen showed the rooftop across from the hotel ballroom, zooming in on a dark figure holding a long-range rifle. "He had you in his sights for at least 3 minutes before the waitress intervened," Dante said grimly. 3 minutes. Julian had been seconds away from death, and no one had noticed except her. Julian turned slowly to face Clara, the cold calculation of a true predator radiating from his every pore. "They will try again," he stated softly. "And when they investigate why they failed tonight, they will find you on the hotel cameras. You are my witness, Clara, and I protect what is mine." She hugged her arms around her chest, the reality of her gilded cage settling heavily over her shoulders. "I am not yours," she whispered. "Not yet," Julian agreed, his dark eyes burning into hers. "But you're under my roof now, which means you follow my rules. You do not leave this penthouse. You are safe here, but make no mistake, Clara Hayes. You cannot go back to your old life." Clara woke to gray Chicago sunlight streaming through unfamiliar, floor-to-ceiling windows and the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee. For a disoriented moment, she could not remember where she was, expecting the familiar water stains on the ceiling of her cramped apartment. Then the memories of the gala, the red dot, and the terrifying escape crashed over her. She pushed back the heavy silk duvet, her body aching from the adrenaline crash of the previous night. On the velvet armchair in the corner, someone had laid out clothes in her exact size. A soft cashmere sweater in deep charcoal, tailored jeans, and fresh undergarments. The precision of it was deeply unsettling, a stark reminder of the power Julian Thorne wielded. She showered quickly in the marble bathroom, washing away the smell of fear and cheap catering perfume, and changed into the impossibly soft clothes. Following the scent of coffee, she navigated the silent, sprawling penthouse until she found Julian in the massive, modern kitchen. He sat at the granite island, staring intently at a sleek silver tablet. Without the restrictive armor of his tuxedo, wearing only dark jeans and a fitted black shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders, he looked less like a polished billionaire and more like the lethal predator he truly was. "Good morning," he said, his voice a rough rumble that sent a strange shiver down her spine. He did not look up from the screen as he pushed a steaming ceramic mug across the counter toward her. Clara wrapped her cold, trembling hands around the warm mug, taking a tentative sip. "Did your men buy these clothes while I was sleeping?" she asked, her voice tight. "My assistant took care of it," Julian replied, finally lifting his gaze to meet hers. His dark eyes were clinical, assessing her from head to toe. "They fit perfectly." Sit down, Clara. We have things to discuss. She pulled out a stool, the plush leather sighing beneath her weight. If this is about last night, I already told you everything I saw. This is not about last night, he said, turning the tablet so she could see the screen. It displayed a detailed dossier with her name, her photograph from a high school yearbook, and lists of addresses. This is about you, Clara Hayes. Born in a small town in Indiana. Only child. Father died in an industrial accident when you were 16. Mother passed away from illness 4 years later, leaving you with a mountain of medical debt. You moved to Chicago 6 months ago with $300 in your bank account. You work mornings pouring coffee, afternoons transcribing audio files, and nights serving the very people who own the banks you owe money to. Indignation flared hot and bright in Clara's chest, momentarily burning away her fear. "Are you interrogating me?" she demanded, her knuckles turning white around the coffee mug. "I am verifying," Julian corrected smoothly, leaning forward. "In my world, coincidences do not exist." A waitress just happens to notice a military-grade laser sight hidden in the shadows of a crowded ballroom and then risks her own life to save a man she does not know. "I had to be absolutely certain you were not planted there by the people trying to kill me." "I am not a spy," Clara snapped, the raw frustration of her invisible, struggling life bubbling to the surface. "I am just a girl who takes the soles of her shoes together because she cannot afford new ones. I grabbed you because I could not stand there and watch another human being die. That is it. There is no grand conspiracy." Julian studied her, the cold suspicion in his eyes slowly melting into something entirely different. Fascination. He reached across the granite island, his large, calloused hand gently covering hers. The warmth of his skin was startling against her freezing fingers. "I know," he said softly. "My men spent the entire night tearing apart your background. They found exactly what you just told me. Nothing but a tragic past, a crushing amount of debt, and a relentless will to survive." Clara swallowed hard, unable to pull her hand away from his grounding touch. "Then you know I do not belong here. Let me go back to my apartment." Julian shook his head, his thumb lightly brushing the back of her hand in a gesture that felt wildly intimate. "I cannot do that, Clara. Whoever ordered the hit on me will be looking for the woman who ruined their perfect plan. If you go back to that fragile little life, you will be dead before the week is over." The absolute certainty in his voice made her breath catch. "So, what happens to me?" she whispered. Julian stood up, moving around the island until he was standing mere inches from her. He towered over her, radiating a dangerous, protective heat that made her heart hammer against her ribs. He reached up, his fingers brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. "You stay with me," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her eyes again. "You saved my life, Clara. That created a debt I intend to repay. In my world, we protect what is ours. And right now, you're the most valuable thing in the city." The air between them grew thick, charged with an unspoken electricity that had nothing to do with the danger lurking outside the penthouse walls. Clara looked up into the eyes of the ruthless Mafia boss, seeing the heavy, exhausted burden of his power, and realizing with terrifying clarity that she was no longer just a captive. She was the one thing Julian Thorne was willing to burn his entire world to protect. The fragile piece of the morning shattered when Dante entered the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear and his expression grim. "Boss, we have a problem," he said, glancing at Clara before focusing entirely on Julian. "The shooter from last night. We found him. Or what is left of him. Someone put 2 bullets in his head and dumped the body in the Chicago River." Julian's face became a mask of carved stone. "Professional cleanup." "How long ago?" "Medical examiner says maybe 4 hours after the attempt on your life," Dante said as he pocketed his phone. Someone wanted to make sure he could not talk. Clara's blood ran cold. "Victor Vance," Julian said quietly, the name dripping with absolute venom. Dante nodded. "His people just sent a message. They want to meet this afternoon. Neutral ground." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Victor Vance?" Clara repeated, the unfamiliar name tasting like ash on her tongue. "He is the head of the West Side Syndicate," Julian explained, his voice dangerously soft. "He has been encroaching on our territory for months. A move like last night would fit his style perfectly. And now he wants to look me in the eye to see how I react to his failed assassination attempt." Julian stood, his decision made in an instant. "Clara comes with us to the meeting. I want Victor to see her face. See that she is alive and well-treated. Let him wonder exactly what she told me." Dante stepped forward, alarmed. "Boss, that is a huge risk." "Everything worth doing is a risk," Julian countered, his gaze locking onto Clara. "I need you to trust me today. Can you do that?" Clara thought about the red dot, about the split-second decision she had made, and realized that trusting the Mafia boss was the only option she had left. "Yes," she whispered. 2 hours later, a fleet of black SUVs cut through Chicago's midday traffic with military precision. Clara sat beside Julian in the back seat, wearing a simple but elegant navy dress his assistant had procured, a garment that made her feel both powerful and terribly vulnerable. They pulled up to an exclusive, dimly lit steakhouse in the Loop. The restaurant looked closed, a sign that this meeting had been arranged specifically for privacy. "Stay close to me," Julian instructed as his hand found the small of her back, a possessive gesture she was beginning to recognize. "Do not speak unless I say it is safe." The interior was cool and heavy with the scent of aged leather and expensive bourbon. A man waited at a corner table, flanked by his own security. Victor Vance was older than Julian by perhaps 15 years, with silver threading through his slicked-back hair and a smile that did not reach his cold, dead eyes. He wore a custom-tailored suit that screamed old money. "Julian," Victor said, his voice smooth and welcoming, a terrifying contrast to the tension vibrating in the room. "Good of you to come. And you brought a guest. How unexpected." "Victor," Julian replied coolly, guiding Clara into the plush booth beside him. "May I introduce Clara Hayes? She recently did me a considerable favor. I find myself in her debt." Victor's eyes sharpened with predatory interest, raking over Clara in a way that made her skin crawl. "A favor? How intriguing." "I wanted to extend my personal condolences about the unfortunate security scare at the gala last night. I trust everyone is all right." The casual way he mentioned it made Clara's stomach turn. He knew. "Everyone is fine," Julian said, his hand finding Clara's beneath the table and squeezing once in warning. Thanks to Clara, who happened to notice something amiss. Victor's gaze swiveled back to her, a chilling smile playing on his lips. "Did she now? How fortunate for you, Julian, to have such observant friends. Although, in our world, people who see things they should not often meet tragic ends." The air in the booth crackled with unspoken violence. Julian's voice dropped several degrees. "Is that a threat, Victor?" "A threat? No." Victor raised his hands in mock surrender. "Merely an observation. The streets of Chicago are dangerous. I would hate for anything to happen to such a beautiful, brave girl." The rest of the brief meeting passed in a blur of veiled threats disguised as business negotiations. When Julian finally stood to leave, Victor extended his hand to Clara. As her trembling fingers brushed his, Victor leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "Be careful, little bird. Men like Julian do not keep things they cannot control. And sooner or later, they always dispose of what they cannot use." Clara yanked her hand back, terror gripping her throat. Once they were safely back in the moving SUV, Julian turned to her, his eyes demanding the truth. "What did he say to you?" She swallowed hard, repeating the chilling warning. Julian's expression went completely cold, a murderous fury hardening his jaw. "Dante," he commanded, his voice slicing through the vehicle's silence. "Change of plans. We are not going back to the penthouse. Take us to the family estate. It is time Victor learned what happens when he threatens what is mine." The black SUV tore through the outskirts of Chicago, leaving the glittering skyline far behind as it plunged into the dense, sprawling woods of the northern suburbs. For 45 minutes, the vehicle was a tomb of suffocating silence, broken only by the rapid tapping of Julian's fingers against his phone screen as he mobilized his forces for war. Clara watched his rigid profile illuminated by the passing streetlights, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They turned down a hidden, winding road bordered by ancient trees, arriving at a set of massive wrought iron gates that swung open instantly at their approach. The Thorne family estate was not just a home, it was an impenetrable fortress built of gray stone and ruthless paranoia. Floodlights sliced through the autumn darkness, revealing dozens of armed men in tactical gear patrolling the 50-acre perimeter with assault rifles strapped to their chests. Clara shrank back into the leather seat, the terrifying reality of Julian's world crashing down on her all over again. These were not just bodyguards, this was a private army, and the man sitting beside her was their absolute commander. The vehicle pulled up to the sweeping stone steps of the main house, and Julian stepped out, offering his hand to her. His grip was firm, anchoring her as she stepped onto the gravel, her legs trembling slightly. Inside, the mansion was a breathtaking display of old wealth and lethal power, with soaring ceilings, priceless artwork, and marble floors that echoed with the heavy footsteps of his lieutenants. Dante materialized from a dimly lit hallway, his expression grave as he handed Julian a leather-bound folder. Julian flipped it open, his dark eyes scanning the contents before his face hardened into a mask of pure, calculated cruelty. "Victor has men watching the southern border of our territory," Julian said, his voice echoing in the cavernous foyer with chilling authority. "Send a team. Break their legs and leave them at the city limits as a warning. If Victor wants to test my defenses, make sure he understands the price of failure. And burn his warehouses on the west side to the ground. Leave nothing but ash." Clara shivered, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as she witnessed the monster beneath the tailored suits. This was the Julian Thorne who ruled the Chicago underworld, a man capable of ordering brutal violence without a flicker of hesitation. Yet, as Dante nodded and vanished to execute the lethal commands, Julian turned back to Clara, and the terrifying mob boss instantly vanished, replaced by a man looking at her with fierce, desperate tenderness. He noticed her shivering and immediately shed his suit jacket, draping the heavy, expensive fabric over her shoulders. The jacket swallowed her small frame, wrapping her in his intoxicating scent of cedar and dark spice. "Come with me," he murmured, his voice softening to a low, comforting rumble. He guided her up the sweeping grand staircase and down a quiet, heavily secured corridor, leading her into a massive private library. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the walls lined with thousands of leather-bound books. Julian locked the heavy oak doors behind them, sealing them away from the violence and chaos brewing outside. He moved to a crystal decanter on a side table, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid, his hands remarkably steady for a man who had just declared war. He handed her a glass, his knuckles brushing lightly against hers. "I never wanted you to see that side of me, Clara," he confessed quietly, staring into the flickering flames of the fireplace. "I wanted to keep you safe from the brutality of my life, but Victor has forced my hand. I will not let him touch you. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let him lay a finger on you." Clara took a slow, burning sip of the bourbon, letting the liquid fire steady her frayed nerves. She looked at this terrifying, powerful man, realizing with sudden, absolute clarity that she was not afraid of him. She had spent her entire life feeling invisible, ignored by the wealthy patrons she served, treated as nothing more than a function to be exploited. But Julian Thorne saw her completely. He was tearing his empire apart to protect a penniless waitress. She set her glass down on the table with hands that barely shook, stepping closer to him until the tips of her shoes touched his. "I know what you are, Julian," she whispered, looking up into his dark, tortured eyes. "I heard you order those men broken. I know the violence you are capable of." She reached up, resting her palm flat against his chest, feeling the heavy, frantic thud of his heart beneath his pristine white shirt. "But when I look at you, I do not see a monster. I see the man who caught my hand in a crowded ballroom and pulled me to safety. I see the man who gave me a place to sleep when the rest of the world looked right through me." Julian let out a ragged breath, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs gently sweeping across her cheekbones. The contrast between his lethal power and his fragile, reverent touch broke the last of her defenses. "You are too good for this world, Clara," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips, burning with a possessive, undeniable hunger. "You should be running from me." "Then it is a good thing I am tired of running," she breathed back. Julian closed the agonizing distance between them, his mouth capturing hers in a kiss that tasted of fine bourbon, desperate fear, and overwhelming desire. Clara melted into him, her hands tangling in his dark hair as he pulled her flush against his solid body. The kiss was a confession, a surrender to the deep, terrifying romance blooming in the shadows of a Mafia war. As the fire crackled in the quiet room, Clara realized she was exactly where she was meant to be, standing in the heart of a fortress, locked in the arms of the most dangerous man in Chicago, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, undeniably safe. The next 48 hours inside the Thorne estate blurred into a suffocating nightmare of waiting. The sprawling mansion, usually echoing with the terrifying efficiency of Julian's empire, had gone completely silent. The retaliation Julian ordered against Victor Vance's warehouses had set the Chicago underworld on fire. In response, the High Commission, a shadowy council of the city's oldest crime families, demanded an immediate peace summit on neutral ground. Julian stood in the doorway of the Grand Library, dressed in a stark black suit that absorbed the afternoon light, adjusting the silver cuffs of his shirt with lethal precision. He looked every inch the ruthless mob boss she had first met at the gala, but when his dark eyes found Clara huddled by the fireplace, the coldness vanished. He crossed the Persian rug in 3 long strides, pulling her into his chest. His heart beat with a steady, reassuring rhythm against her cheek as he buried his face in her dark hair. "I do not want to go," he murmured, his voice tight with an emotion that sounded dangerously like fear. The commission guaranteed a weaponless meeting, but Victor has already proven he does not respect the old rules. "I am leaving a dozen of my best men at your door. Do not let anyone inside unless it is Dante or me." Clara gripped the lapels of his suit, her fingers trembling as she looked up at him. "Promise me you will come back." Julian traced her lower lip with his thumb, his gaze fierce and absolute. "For you, I will burn my way out of hell itself to come back." He kissed her hard, a desperate promise sealed in silence, and then he was gone. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, locking Clara inside her gilded cage. The hours stretched into an agonizing eternity. She paced the length of the library, the plush carpet offering no comfort to her racing mind. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a violent autumn storm began to batter the estate, rain lashing against the reinforced glass like thousands of tiny, angry fists. Clara wrapped Julian's discarded cashmere sweater tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the lingering scent of cedar and spice, trying to anchor herself to the memory of his touch. She thought about her old life, the endless double shifts at the restaurant, the eviction notices, the crushing invisibility. It felt like a lifetime ago. She had traded the grinding poverty of her past for a terrifying, glittering world where death lurked around every corner and, surprisingly, she did not regret a single second of it. By nightfall, the oppressive silence of the house shattered. It started as a low, frantic hum of voices in the hallway, followed by the heavy thud of combat boots sprinting across the marble floors downstairs. Clara froze, her stomach dropping into an abyss of pure terror. She pressed her ear against the heavy oak door. Muffled shouts echoed from the foyer, the sharp, panicked cadence of men who had just looked death in the face. Dante's voice cut through the chaos, raw and desperate. "Secure the perimeter. Shut the gates. Get the doctor here now. I do not care if you have to drag him out of his bed at gunpoint." Clara could not breathe. She backed away from the door, her heart hammering against her ribs with brutal force. The peace summit had been a trap. Victor Vance had orchestrated a brutal, rule-breaking ambush during the sacred underworld meeting. The sound of tires screeching on the wet gravel outside drew her to the window. Two black SUVs tore up the driveway, their chassis riddled with bullet holes, the windows shattered into glittering spiderwebs of broken glass. The vehicles skidded to a violent halt at the base of the stone steps. Dozens of guards flooded out of the mansion, their assault rifles raised, shouting commands over the roaring thunder. The rear door of the lead SUV was kicked open, and Dante emerged, his usually immaculate suit soaked in dark, terrifying crimson. He turned back, reaching into the vehicle, and Clara let out a strangled gasp as she saw them pull Julian from the back seat. The ruthless, untouchable Mafia boss was slumped against Dante, his white shirt completely saturated with blood. His head hung forward, his powerful body limp and vulnerable in the pouring rain. They were not taking him to a hospital. In Julian's world, hospitals asked questions and emergency rooms were just another place for assassins to finish the job. They were bringing him into the fortress. Clara watched the blood drip from Julian's hand onto the pristine stone steps, realizing that the war had not just escalated. It had broken through the impenetrable walls of their sanctuary. The fragile bubble of safety Julian had built around her had just been violently shattered, leaving nothing but the brutal, bloody reality of the life she had chosen. She turned away from the window, her hands shaking as she ran toward the library door, knowing that the man she loved was bleeding out on the marble floors below, and that waiting in the shadows was no longer an option. Clara threw open the heavy library doors and raced down the grand staircase, her bare feet slipping slightly against the polished marble. The sprawling foyer, usually a monument to silent authority, was absolute chaos. A dozen armed men flooded the entrance, their heavy boots tracking rain and dark crimson blood across the pristine floor. Dante and another guard were carrying Julian through the double doors, his massive frame sagging dangerously between them. "Get him to the drawing room," Dante roared over the roaring storm outside, his voice cracking with a panic Clara had never heard before. "Where is that doctor?" Clara did not freeze. The blinding terror that had paralyzed her upstairs suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, hyper-focused clarity she had learned during the 4 agonizing years of caring for her dying mother. She pushed her way through the wall of hardened mobsters, ignoring the heavy weapons and the frantic shouting. "Put him on the sofa," Clara commanded, her voice cutting through the panic with surprising authority. Dante looked at her, his eyes wild and unfocused, but he obeyed, lowering the Mafia boss onto the antique leather. Julian's white shirt was completely soaked, a dark, pulsing wound high on his chest, just below his collarbone. He was pale as ash, his skin slick with freezing rain and sweat, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. "We need pressure," Clara said, already tearing open his ruined shirt with blood-stained fingers. "Dante, give me your jacket." "Now." Dante stripped off his soaked suit coat and handed it to her. Clara balled up the heavy fabric and pressed it directly against the gunshot wound with all her body weight. Julian let out a guttural groan, his dark eyes flying open. His gaze was clouded with immense pain, but the moment he saw Clara leaning over him, her hands covered in his blood, a faint, desperate smile touched his lips. "I told you to stay locked in the library," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper against the thunder outside. "You do not get to give me orders while you are bleeding out on the furniture," Clara shot back, fighting the hot tears burning in her eyes. "Keep your eyes open, Julian. Look at me." She pressed harder, ignoring the warm, sticky blood pooling over her knuckles and dripping onto her clothes. "How did this happen?" she demanded, looking up at Dante, who stood frozen in horror. "Victor had men hiding in the waiter's staff," Dante spat, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. "They pulled weapons the second the commission called the meeting to order. It was an absolute slaughter. Julian pushed me out of the way and took the bullet meant for my neck." Clara looked back down at the man beneath her hands. He was ruthless, dangerous, a killer who ordered men broken without a single second thought, but he had just sacrificed his own body to save his friend. "You are an absolute idiot," Clara whispered, her voice trembling uncontrollably as Julian reached up with his uninjured arm. His large, freezing hand cupped her cheek, his thumb smearing a thick streak of his own blood across her pale skin. "You should not be seeing this," he murmured, his heavy eyelids fluttering as consciousness began to slip. "This is not your world, Clara. You are too good for this." "It is my world now," she replied fiercely, leaning into his touch and refusing to let him look away. "I am not leaving you. I am never leaving you." The estate doctor finally burst through the heavy double doors, hauling 2 massive medical bags. He took one look at the horrific wound and immediately started barking orders, pushing Clara aside to administer a local anesthetic and begin digging for the shattered bullet. Clara refused to leave the room. She stood just 3 feet away, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching in terrifying silence as the doctor worked for over an hour. The sound of metal scraping against bone made her stomach churn, but she did not look away, cementing her place in a room full of hardened criminals who watched her with newfound respect. When the bullet finally clanged into a metal basin and the wound was tightly stitched and bandaged, the doctor stood, wiping the sweat from his brow. He lost a massive amount of blood, but the bullet missed the artery by a fraction of an inch, the doctor said to Dante, packing his bloody instruments. "He needs extreme rest, high-dose antibiotics, and absolutely no movement." Dante nodded silently, dismissing the doctor and the remaining guards until only he and Clara were left in the quiet, blood-stained room. Julian was unconscious, his breathing finally deep and even. Clara walked slowly back to the sofa, sinking onto the floor beside him. She gently took his cold hand in her bloody ones, pressing his knuckles to her lips. She had spent her entire life trying to be invisible, trying to avoid danger and conflict, but looking at the broken Mafia boss, she realized she was ready to step out of the shadows entirely. She was strong enough to survive this brutal war, and more importantly, she was strong enough to stand beside the man waging it. Julian did not wake until the following afternoon. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, casting the library in a soft, perpetual twilight. Clara had not left his side for a single second, falling into a fitful sleep on the rug beside the sofa, her hand still locked in his. When his dark eyes finally fluttered open, cloudier and weaker than she had ever seen them, he immediately searched for her. "I am right here," she whispered, her voice rough from exhaustion and tears. "Do not try to sit up." He squeezed her hand, a weak but grounding gesture. "Victor," he asked, his voice a hoarse rasp. "Victor won the summit," Dante said, stepping out from the shadows near the door. He looked as haggard as Clara felt, still wearing a blood-stained shirt. "The commission bought his lie. He claimed he was defending himself against your aggression. They ordered a 2-week cooling-off period for both sides to reconsider options. If we strike back now, the entire commission will turn against us. If we wait, we look weak, and Victor will absorb our territory piece by piece." Julian closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his jaw. For the first time, the untouchable Mafia boss looked truly defeated. "I do not know the right move," he confessed quietly, the admission costing him dearly. "If I fight, I lose everything. If I surrender, he kills us all anyway." The oppressive silence stretched out, thick with impending doom. Clara looked at Julian, the man who had torn his life apart to protect her, And then she looked at Dante, the loyal soldier who was waiting for an order that would never come. An idea, sharp and brilliant, began to form in her mind. It was crazy, it was dangerous, and it was completely unorthodox for their world. What if you do not fight him at all? Clara said slowly, her voice clear and steady in the quiet room. Julian opened his eyes, looking at her like she had grown a second head. Clara, I cannot just surrender. I am not saying surrender, she clarified, her mind racing as the pieces clicked into place. I am saying, what if you change the game entirely? What if, instead of fighting over territory and power, you offer him something he cannot refuse? Something that looks exactly like weakness, but is actually absolute strength. Julian's eyes narrowed, a spark of the old, calculating predator returning. I am listening. Clara took a deep breath, stepping into the strategic void. Victor wants to look powerful in front of the commission. He wants to be seen as the peacemaker, the reasonable one. So let him have that. Publicly agree to a merger of your territories, with him appearing to be in charge. But do it with conditions that secretly benefit you. Dante scoffed, a harsh sound. He will never agree to conditions if he thinks he has already won. He will if they sound like legitimate business terms, Clara countered. Equal partnership on paper. Joint decision-making on all major operations. And she hesitated, knowing this next part was the most dangerous gamble of all. Make me part of the deal. Absolutely not, Julian growled instantly, trying to sit up and wincing as the wound pulled. I am not using you as bait. I am not asking you to use me, Clara insisted, stepping closer and placing her hand gently on his uninjured shoulder to keep him down. I am offering to be visible proof of your commitment to peace. Victor threatened me because he thinks I am your weakness. What if, instead, I become your strength? Your connection to legitimacy, to the outside world. Julian stared at her, the conflict clear in his expression. Clara, if you are publicly connected to me, there is no going back. Your life will never be the same. You will be a permanent target for every enemy I have. I am already a target, she pointed out logically. At least this way, I am a target with a purpose. And maybe, just maybe, we can turn Victor's trap back on him. How? Dante asked, his skepticism wavering. By giving him the public appearance of a massive victory, Clara smiled, the plan solidifying into a lethal weapon, while you maintain actual control behind the scenes. And to seal the trap, we invite the FBI's white-collar crime division to audit the combined operations. We frame it as a necessary step for the newly merged, legitimate business. The silence in the room was absolute. The FBI, Dante whispered, the concept utterly alien to a mafia syndicate. Julian was quiet for a long time, his strategic mind furiously calculating the angles, the risks, and the potential for total victory. If Victor refuses the audit in front of the cameras, he looks guilty of breaking the peace, Julian murmured, piecing it together. If he accepts, the feds will tear apart his illegal operations while we have already sterilized ours. Julian looked up at Clara, his dark eyes burning with a mixture of terror and awe. It is completely insane, but it could work. It puts you in the direct line of fire. I am already in the fire, Clara said softly. Julian reached up with his good arm, pulling her down until her forehead rested against his. You are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the most foolish. Can I be both? She whispered, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. Julian let out a soft, breathless laugh. Yes, you can definitely be both. If we do this, Clara, you need to understand. It is no longer just about business. You will be mine in the eyes of everyone. My partner, my woman, my equal. There is no halfway with this. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she did not hesitate. Then tomorrow we change the game. The transformation from an invisible waitress to the public face of a mafia empire did not happen overnight, but over the next 3 days, Clara watched her old self dissolve entirely into the heavily guarded walls of the Thorne estate. The morning of the press conference arrived with a biting Chicago wind that rattled the reinforced glass of her bedroom windows. Julian's personal stylist had arrived before dawn, bringing garment bags that cost more than Clara's entire college tuition. Now, she stood before the antique gilded mirror in the master suite, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The exhaustion and quiet desperation that used to shadow her eyes were gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. She wore a bespoke designer dress in a deep, striking emerald green that hugged her curves and brought out the fierce, unyielding light in her eyes. Her dark hair, usually scraped back into a severe, practical bun to keep out of the catering food, was styled in soft, glamorous waves that cascaded over her shoulders. The makeup was elegant but powerful, a mask of flawless perfection designed to project absolute authority. She was no longer Clara, the struggling girl from Indiana who taped her shoes together. She looked like a queen stepping onto a battlefield. The heavy oak door clicked open, and Julian stepped into the room. He was dressed in a pristine, tailored charcoal suit that expertly hid the thick bandages still wrapped tightly around his chest. He moved with a slight, deliberate stiffness, but the lethal aura of the untouchable mob boss was fully restored. However, when his dark eyes landed on Clara, his breath hitched audibly in the quiet room, and the ruthless facade melted away. He crossed the thick Persian rug, his gaze sweeping over her with a mixture of pure awe and possessive hunger. "You're breathtaking," he murmured, his voice a rough, velvet rumble that sent a flush of heat down her neck. He stopped just inches from her, his uninjured arm coming up to gently cup her jaw. "I always knew there was fire inside you, Clara, but seeing you like this, you look like you could roll the entire city." Clara turned her face into his palm, her hands reaching up to smooth the lapels of his suit, hyper-aware of the gunshot wound hidden just beneath the expensive fabric. "We are going to roll it together," she corrected softly, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Julian? Once we walk out those doors and face the cameras, there is no taking it back. We are inviting the federal government into your world." Julian stepped closer, eliminating the agonizing space between them until she could feel the steady, heavy beat of his heart. "I have never been more certain of anything in my 36 years of life," he said, his eyes burning with absolute conviction. "You changed me, Clara. You made me realize that living in the shadows, constantly fighting for territory and blood, is not living at all. You gave me something worth protecting, something worth changing everything for." He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was slow, deep, and searingly intimate. It was not the desperate, blood-tasting kiss of the night he was shot, but a deliberate, anchoring vow of true partnership. Clara melted against his solid chest, drawing strength from his unwavering presence, knowing that they were walking into a lion's den, but feeling entirely invincible in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing a little heavier, a sharp knock at the door signaled the end of their private sanctuary. Dante entered the room, his expression tight with focused anticipation. "Boss, it is time. The ballroom downstairs is packed. Every major news outlet in Chicago has cameras set up, and the representatives from the FBI white-collar division just arrived through the secured rear entrance." Dante paused, looking at Clara with a deep, respectful nod that he had never given her before. "Victor Vance is pulling up to the front gates now with a dozen of his top men. He thinks he is walking into his own coronation." Julian's jaw sat into a hard, unforgiving line, the ruthless predator taking his place at the forefront once again. "Let him think he is one right up until the moment the trap snaps shut on his neck," Julian commanded coldly. He turned back to Clara, offering his hand not as a protector guiding a civilian, but as a king escorting his equal. "Are you ready, my love?" Clara looked at the outstretched hand, the scars on his knuckles a testament to the violent world she was embracing, and placed her own trembling hand firmly within his warm grip. "I am ready," she said, lifting her chin to face the brutal spotlight. Together, Their fingers intertwined, they walked out of the bedroom and descended the grand staircase, stepping out of the shadows and into the blinding flash of a war they were about to win. The heavy oak doors swung open to reveal the grand ballroom of the Thorne estate, transformed overnight from a silent fortress into a blinding arena of flashing cameras and murmuring reporters. Clara descended the sweeping marble staircase with Julian's hand firmly wrapped around hers, the warmth of his grip the only thing keeping her knees from buckling under the crushing weight of 100 staring eyes. The emerald silk of her dress brushed against the stone steps, a vibrant splash of color in a room dominated by dark suits and calculated shadows. At the front of the room, standing near a makeshift podium draped in velvet, Victor Vance waited with a sickeningly triumphant smile plastered across his weathered face. He looked like a man who had just conquered an empire, flanked by a dozen of his most vicious enforcers who tried and failed to look like legitimate businessmen. In the back corners of the ballroom, blending into the shadows, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for, stood the representatives from the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division, their presence a tightly coiled spring waiting to snap. Julian led Clara to the podium, his posture radiating the absolute, terrifying authority of a king, completely hiding the fresh gunshot wound bandaged beneath his charcoal suit. The flashbolts erupted in a blinding storm as Julian adjusted the microphone, his dark eyes sweeping over the crowd before locking dead onto Victor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice a smooth, deep rumble that instantly commanded total silence in the cavernous room. "Today marks the end of a violent era in Chicago. For decades, our organizations have operated in the shadows, fighting bitter wars over territory and influence. But the future demands evolution. I am proud to announce a historic, permanent merger between the Thorne family and the Vance Syndicate, creating a unified, fully legitimate corporate enterprise." A murmur of shock rippled through the press corps. Victor's smile widened, his chest puffing out with arrogant satisfaction as he tasted his apparent victory, believing Julian was publicly surrendering the city to him. But Victor did not know the woman standing quietly at Julian's side. Julian reached out, pulling Clara slightly forward so she stood shoulder to shoulder with him under the glaring lights. To ensure the success and integrity of this new era, Julian continued, his voice echoing with lethal precision, "I am naming Clara Hayes as the equal co-chair and managing partner of our newly combined assets. She will oversee all legitimate operations moving forward." Victor's triumphant smile faltered, a flicker of dark confusion crossing his eyes as he stared at the waitressing girl he had threatened just days ago, now elevated to rule beside his greatest rival. But Clara kept her chin high, meeting the rival boss's gaze with ice in her veins, watching the exact moment his arrogance began to rot into unease. Then, Julian dropped the final, fatal piece of Clara's brilliant trap. "Furthermore," Julian said, his voice rising above the sudden frantic whispering of the reporters, "a truly legitimate enterprise requires absolute, unquestionable transparency. Therefore, as the first official act of our new partnership, we have invited the federal authorities to conduct an immediate, comprehensive audit of all combined warehouses, shipping ports, and financial records belonging to both the Thorne and Vance organizations." Total, suffocating chaos erupted. The flashbolts fired like strobe lights, blinding and relentless. Victor Vance went deathly pale, his eyes wide with a sudden, feral panic. He had spent the last 48 hours preparing for a mob war, not a federal audit. His illegal shipments, his weapons caches, his hidden ledgers were all completely exposed, while Julian had spent the peace summit quietly sterilizing every single inch of the Thorne empire. The trap had closed with a deafening snap. If Victor refused the audit now on live television, he would be declaring war on the federal government and breaking the underworld truce in front of the watching commission. If he accepted, he would be handing himself a life sentence in federal prison. "Turn the cameras off," Victor snarled, his carefully crafted mask of a legitimate businessman completely shattering. He stepped toward the podium, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated fury, spitting words over the roar of the press. "This was not part of the agreement, Julian. You think you can trap me? You think you can hand me over to the feds?" The agents at the back of the room began to push their way forward through the sea of journalists, their badges suddenly visible, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. Clara stood her ground beside Julian, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she did not flinch. "Transparency was the condition of the peace, Victor," Clara said, her voice ringing out clear and steady through the microphones, carrying across the city of Chicago. "Unless you have something you desperately need to hide." The words struck Victor like a physical blow, backing him into a corner from which there was absolutely no escape, his empire crumbling to ash under the emerald gaze of the woman he had fatally underestimated. The silence that followed Clara's words was brittle, lasting only a fraction of a second before the cornered predator lashed out. Victor Vance realized with terrifying clarity that his empire was already dead, and in that desperate, suffocating realization, his polished mask shattered completely. He lunged forward with explosive speed, bypassing the podium and Julian's initial defensive block, his hand diving beneath his tailored jacket. Before the federal agents could close the distance, Victor grabbed Clara roughly by the shoulder, spinning her around and pressing the cold, heavy barrel of a suppressed pistol directly against her temple. Chaos erupted in the grand ballroom. The reporters screamed, dropping their cameras and scrambling for the heavy oak doors, while the federal agents drew their service weapons, shouting conflicting orders over the deafening noise. Julian froze instantly. The lethal, untouchable Mafia boss who had torn Chicago apart stopped dead in his tracks, his hands raised slightly, his dark eyes locked onto Victor with a murderous, terrifying intensity that promised absolute hell. "Nobody moves," Victor roared, his voice cracking with a manic, feral edge, using Clara's body as a human shield against the dozen federal guns pointed at his chest. "I will blow her brains all over the stage. Back off." The cold steel of the gun bit into Clara's skin, Victor's panicked breath hot against her ear, but surprisingly, the paralyzing terror she expected never came. She had spent 24 years of her life feeling helpless, trapped by poverty and the cruelty of a world that refused to see her, but looking at Julian standing just 5 feet away, she knew she was no longer that invisible, broken girl. Julian's chest heaved, his jaw locked so tight the muscle leaped beneath his skin, the fresh gunshot wound clearly tearing beneath his suit as he held his agonizing restraint. "Let her go, Victor," Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, demonic whisper that somehow carried over the screaming crowd. "You pull that trigger, and I swear to God, there is not a federal prison in this country that will keep me from tearing you apart piece by piece." Victor laughed, a wet, unhinged sound. "I am already dead, Julian. You and this little waitress killed me the second you invited the feds. But I am going to make sure you have nothing left to build your new empire on." Clara knew Victor was going to pull the trigger. There was nothing left for him to lose. But Victor had made the fatal mistake of underestimating her one last time. He thought she was just a fragile pawn, a weak civilian who would freeze in the face of death. Clara closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, drawing in a sharp breath, and then drove the needle-thin stiletto heel of her emerald shoe directly through the top of Victor's foot with every ounce of strength she possessed. Victor howled in sudden, blinding agony, his grip loosening just enough as his knee buckled. It was the only opening Julian needed. He moved with terrifying, predatory speed, completely ignoring the tearing pain in his own chest. He grabbed Victor's gun hand, twisting the wrist with a sickening crack that echoed through the microphone, forcing the barrel toward the ceiling before driving his knee brutally into Victor's ribs. The pistol clattered uselessly across the marble floor. Victor collapsed, gasping for air, but Julian was not finished. He grabbed the rival boss by the collar of his expensive suit, his fist pulling back to deliver a lethal, crushing blow that would end Victor's life right there on the stage. "Julian, no," Clara shouted, grabbing his raised arm with both hands. "He is done. Let the feds have him. Do not throw our future away for him." Julian froze, his fist trembling with the violent adrenaline of the underworld he was trying to leave behind. He looked at Victor, bloodied and pathetic on the floor, and then he looked at Clara, her emerald dress pristine, her eyes begging him to choose the light over the darkness. Slowly, agonizingly, Julian released his grip, stepping back as a dozen federal agents swarmed the stage, tackling Victor and his men to the ground, slapping heavy iron cuffs on their wrists. The cameras that had not been abandoned kept rolling, broadcasting the total, humiliating destruction of Victor Bance to the entire city. Julian did not care about the cameras, the agents, or the reporters. He pulled Clara fiercely against his chest, wrapping his arms around her as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. She buried her face in his neck, inhaling the deep, grounding scent of cedar and spice, feeling the violent trembling of his massive frame slowly subside. The war was over. The trap had worked flawlessly. As the federal agents dragged a screaming, defeated Victor out of the ballroom, Julian kissed the top of Clara's head, holding her tighter than ever. They had broken the rules of the underworld, they had survived the crossfire, and standing there amidst the flashing lights and the shattered remnants of the Mafia syndicate, Clara knew they had finally won their freedom. The champagne flutes did not slip through Clara's fingers anymore. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly minted Thorn Foundation Tower, looking out over the glittering Chicago skyline, the very city that had once treated her as completely invisible. It had been exactly 2 years since the chaotic night in the Drake Hotel ballroom. Victor Vance was currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security federal prison. The violent underworld war had been completely dismantled. Julian had kept the terrifying promise he made on that stage. Working alongside the federal authorities, he had surrendered every illegal operation, dismantled the gambling rings, and purged the violent elements from his syndicate. The old Mafia commission had crumbled, unable to survive the blinding light of federal scrutiny that Julian had brilliantly weaponized against them. Dante had stayed by their side through it all, trading his tactical gear for tailored suits as the head of corporate security, proving that true loyalty in the dark translated perfectly into the light. In the ashes of the old syndicate, Julian had built a clean, untouchable corporate empire rooted in legitimate real estate and community investment. He had poured millions into rebuilding the very neighborhoods his predecessors had exploited. And true to his word, he had not built it alone. Clara Thorne was no longer the desperately poor girl from Indiana who taped her worn waitressing shoes together and worked 3 exhausting jobs just to make rent. She was the managing director of the foundation, an equal partner who sat in high-stakes boardrooms and wielded power with the same fierce, unwavering grace she had shown when she stared down a loaded gun on live television. The heavy glass door to her office clicked open, and Clara did not need to turn around to know who had entered. The familiar, intoxicating scent of cedar and dark spice filled the air long before Julian wrapped his strong arms tightly around her waist from behind. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his lips pressing a soft, lingering kiss against her neck. He wore a tailored navy suit, but the dangerous edge of the ruthless mob boss had softened into something deeper, something grounded in profound peace. "You are working late again, Mrs. Thorne," he murmured, his voice a warm rumble that still sent a thrill straight to her core. Clara leaned back against his solid chest, covering his large hands with her own. Her diamond wedding band caught the city lights, sparkling brightly against the faint, silver scars on Julian's knuckles. "I was just thinking about how far we have come," she replied softly. 2 years ago, I was terrified you were going to have me thrown into the Chicago River." Julian chuckled, turning her in his arms so he could look down into her deep amber eyes. The cold, calculating predator she had met in that ballroom was completely gone, replaced by a man who looked at her with pure, unconditional reverence. "I told you from the very beginning that I protect what is mine," he whispered, brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. "You saved my life, Clara. You pulled me out of the darkness and gave me a reason to build a world where we could actually live in the light." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, a sweet promise that echoed the vows they had made to each other 6 months ago in a quiet, private ceremony surrounded only by Dante, Maria, and a few trusted friends. Clara kissed him back, pouring all her love into the man who had seen her when the rest of the world looked right past her. She had risked absolutely everything, stepping into the line of fire for a dangerous stranger, but she had gained a love so fierce and protective it had rewritten the stars themselves. Their story proved that sometimes the most beautiful lives are forged in the most terrifying fires, and that true power does not come from ruling through fear, but from finding someone willing to stand beside you in the absolute worst of storms. Thank you so much for joining us on Sunni Romance for this emotional journey. If Clara and Julian's story touched your heart, please press the like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the captivating tales we share every single day. We would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to risk everything to find where you truly belong, or stepped out of the shadows to protect someone you love? We read every single comment and deeply value your stories. We wish everyone watching this video health, a joyful life, and peaceful days surrounded by the people who cherish you. Keep your faith in love, because you never know when one brave choice might change your entire life. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.